Deeper right now. Joining us, the Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Ed Royce. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
So are you with Rand Paul or John McCain?
I'm with neither, because I think the solution to this really is to have boots on the ground, but not American boots. From my standpoint, it looks to me like we need Kurdish boots on the ground, we need Arab boots on the ground. I believe, though, that there is a role for air support, unlike Rand Paul. I think that the United States needs to go in and hit the training camps as we did today, because if we don't take those training camps out, those fighters will come back and hit the United States.
Because when I hear Senator Rand Paul say the president and his Republican friends are clamoring for airstrikes against Assad, he says they should realize the consequences of more war. What do you say to Senator Paul when you hear that kind of language?
The difficulty here is that this is not a war that the United States is declaring on ISIL. This is a war that ISIL has declared on that region, on Europe, and on the United States. They're the ones that say, embrace our caliphate or die. They're the ones that are beheading our journalists and massacring civilians, Christians and other religious minorities. And so in response to that, the international community is saying, well, do we allow them to continue to train in terror and learn these tactics and then send these individuals back to attack us, or do we hit the training camps? And the other thing that the international community is saying is, well, you have Kurdish forces on the ground that want to do the fighting. You have the Free Syrian Army. Why not give them the equipment, vet them, train them certainly, but let them do the fighting on the ground, because we've had enough of sending our troops into that theater of operation.
You chaired a hearing today. You're the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. You had John Kerry, Secretary Hagel's been testifying up on the Hill. Did you get all the answers you need?
No, we haven't gotten all the answers we need, and subsequently I went into a classified briefing with my ranking member, Elliot Agel of New York, in order to glean some more information about the operations on the ground. We also had an opportunity today to talk to several ambassadors from the region about their willingness to support financially, because we're pushing to have them pay for this operation. They've indicated that they will do that, but this is an ongoing process, and certainly we want to continue with our hearings to glean more information as we go forward.
Which Arab countries are going to pay for it?
Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates are looking at picking up a big part of the tab, and I think that's quite appropriate. We intend to talk to Kuwait and other countries as well.
Because a lot of us remember Kuwait was liberated by the United States in a coalition back in 1991. It's a wealthy country, as you well know, and all of our viewers know as well. Did any of them give you a commitment? In fact, is there any commitment from any of the Arab countries in the region, from Turkey, from any of the European countries, to join with Iraqi troops, with Kurdish troops, with the Free Syrian Army, to put so-called combat boots on the ground to try to destroy ISIS?
The offer or the suggestion that we get is that they're willing to work with groups such as the same tribes in Iraq and western Iraq that rose up against al-Qaeda. If you recall, the whole awakening, Sunni awakening there in the West, they will send their specialists in who train and communicate with those elements, and likewise with the Kurdish forces. So I think we're going to get assistance, but we didn't hear that they want to do the fighting on the ground. What we did, we had a discussion the other day with the foreign minister of Kurdistan, though, and he has 190,000 fighters. And if he can get the equipment that they need, anti-tank missiles, artillery, and so forth, it will allow him to be much more effective with his force on the ground, men and women in these Kurdish battalions who are very good fighters, the Peshmerga. So these are the kinds of discussions we're having, and there is a role here for air power from the United States and our allies. France joined us today, but I would say not on the ground, not ground troops.
Not yet. And the U.S. is supplying those Kurdish Peshmerga fighters with some equipment. But until now, it's all gone through Baghdad and the government there under Nouri al-Maliki, the former prime minister. I don't know about the new government there, the new prime minister. They haven't really given the Kurds what they need. They are badly underarmed, if you will, because of the lack of resources. Is that going to change?
And Wolf, that's a great point, because Elliot Engel and I talked about bipartisan legislation today that would directly indicate that we should circumvent Baghdad and get those armaments into the hands of the Kurdish troops that are actually doing the fighting. And I think that will solve part of the problem.
Let's talk about Ukraine for a moment. The president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, was here. He met with a joint session of the House and the Senate today, went to the White House, came here to the Situation Room. I just interviewed him in the last hour. A couple of questions. He's asking the United States to designate Ukraine as a major non-NATO ally, give Ukraine that status. Are you ready to do so?
I think we're ready for a debate about that. I'm not ready to categorically say at this moment that we're going to do that. I think we need to look at the ramifications, have a hearing on this. I'll talk to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, but we really need to think about all of the consequences when we talk about the road to NATO membership.
He's also asked the United States for not only non-lethal but lethal military equipment. So far, the Obama administration has rejected that request. Where do you stand?
I think there's another way to obtain that, and I think from Poland and other countries in the region. And I think there is a way for us to be supportive of transferring those assets that they're seeking to get without having the kind of confrontation that it might create between Russia and the United States if we begin to, directly arm Ukraine. That said, there are ample armaments of Ukraine's close allies in that region, including Poland, that could be transferred to Ukrainian forces on the ground. And I think that's a possible resolution to
One
this.
final question. You do support providing lethal military equipment to those moderate Syrian rebels, right?
Well, I know that for 2 years now, the Central Intelligence Agency has been vetting, and basically these are the middle class out of Damascus, the Sunni middle class in Aleppo, but they're joined by a lot of defectors who are Alawites, by Christian units as well, and frankly, within this category, as you vet them, there are people who have been fighting both against ISIS on their eastern flank and from above, those barrel bombs that are being dropped by Assad, who frankly have stood their ground. They should be given the equipment to defend themselves and defend Aleppo, yes.
Well, very quickly, why do you support providing lethal equipment to the Syrian rebels but not to Ukraine, which is a democracy?
We are fighting right now against ISIL that is trying to kill us. This is in our interest to put that down. We're in the middle of negotiations between Poroshenko and Russia that grants a certain amount of autonomy, a guarantee of language rights and culture rights to the ethnic Russian-speaking people in the East, as well as a negotiation over local autonomy. There's every possibility that this could take hold. And I think in the moment, if we want to see the transfer of additional weapons into Ukraine, that certainly can be done, but it shouldn't be done formally by the United States with an announcement at a moment when there's negotiations going on that might wind down the situation in eastern Ukraine.
Fair enough. There is a fragile ceasefire that's been holding more or less over these past several days as well. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Ed Royce is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.